On a calm evening in September 1937, Chicago businessman Charles Sherman Ross was out for a drive, unaware that his life was about to change forever. At 72, Ross had lived a life that many would envy. He was a successful greeting card magnate, a philanthropist, and a well-respected figure in the community. But on that fateful night, as he drove with Florence Freihaig, his former secretary, through Franklin Park, Illinois, their journey took a harrowing turn. The peaceful drive was interrupted by the blinding headlights of a car following them closely. At first, Ross thought nothing of it, until the car pulled up beside them and a man with a revolver forced them off the road. The driver was John Henry Seadlund, a 27-year-old drifter with a past littered with criminal activity. His accomplice, James Atwood Gray, was waiting to join him in the plot that would soon send shockwaves through the nation. Ross, a man in his twilight years with a frail heart, was kidnapped right from his car. He was taken by force, with Freihager robbed and instructed to lie flat on the floor. A chilling warning echoed in her ears, not to call the police or she would face deadly consequences. It was an abduction unlike any other. A demand for a $50,000 ransom was soon delivered, and from that moment forward, the city would be gripped by a story of greed, betrayal, and bloodshed. But what should have been a simple kidnapping for ransom soon spiraled into something far darker. Seadlund, a man with a growing ambition to escape his past, had no intention of simply collecting a ransom and letting Ross go free. On October 10, 1937, the fate of Ross took a brutal twist. After a series of ransom letters and negotiations, the plan unraveled in the most violent way possible. Seadlund, now fully engulfed in his own deceit, made the fatal decision to kill Ross, along with his accomplice Gray, during a struggle. Both men, former allies, were disposed of in a pit in the woods near Spooner, Wisconsin. Seadlund buried them, leaving behind only traces of a life snuffed out too soon and a trail of blood money that would lead the FBI on a nationwide hunt. What had begun as a straightforward kidnapping had now become an unthinkable crime, a double murder that would leave the nation stunned. The FBI, under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, immediately launched one of the largest investigations in its history. The agency, eager to prove its mettle, mobilized agents across multiple states in a manhunt that would eventually corner Seadlund. But not before his actions led to a chain of tragic events. The letters, typed untraceable, formed the foundation of the investigation. Their language was chilling, demanding a hefty ransom while hinting at something far darker. A clue in one of those letters, a typewriter used to type out the ransom demands, would eventually crack open the case. The investigation was on, and the FBI, already gaining national attention for its aggressive pursuit of criminals, began piecing together the puzzle that would eventually bring justice, but not before Seadlund's greed and desire for power led him to make a fatal miscalculation. The ransom had been paid. The money, $50,000 in non-consecutive unmarked bills, was collected from a remote drop-off point near Rockford, Illinois. But Seadlund's obsession with the prize didn't end there. Rather than simply disappear with his loot, he left a trail of evidence, a trail that would ultimately be his undoing. The bills were marked, the photos of Ross holding a Chicago Tribune as proof of life, the various letters that could be traced back to his location. All these pieces added up to a story of violence, deception, and a killer's reckless drive to escape justice. But the investigation didn't stop with Seadlund's capture. The FBI, digging into every corner of his past, uncovered the true extent of his criminal life. They found evidence of a man whose heart was as cold as his crimes. Seadlund had been a criminal long before he set his sights on Ross. His violent tendencies, his greed, and his total lack of remorse marked him as a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. As authorities closed in on Seadlund, he made a desperate attempt to cover his tracks, leaving behind a series of buried bodies, money, and remnants of a life he'd thought he could escape. The $50,000 had been split between him and Gray, with Seadlund taking the lion's share. But with his wealth came his downfall, as greed often breeds a trail too difficult to cover. The world watched as the FBI pieced together the evidence. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear. Seadlund's desire for wealth and his belief that he had pulled off the perfect crime would prove to be his undoing. His capture in January 1938 at a racetrack in Santa Anita, California, marked the end of a manhunt that had captivated the nation. The press, having whipped up a frenzy, now turned their attention to the trial, the motives, and the endless speculation about what had truly driven Seadlund to commit such heinous acts. The trial that followed would see Seadlund convicted, and justice was served, though not without a lingering feeling that something larger was at play. For his accomplice, Gray, there would be no such closure. His death at Seadlund's hands was a stark reminder that trust between criminals could be just as fragile as that between a kidnapper and his victim. The loss of life, the betrayal, and the execution of Seadlund in July 1938 marked the final chapter of a case that had haunted the American public for nearly a year. The capture of John Henry Seadlund marked a dramatic moment in the FBI's rise as a national force, but it was only the beginning of uncovering the full scope of his crimes. Seadlund's capture came in January 1938 at the Santa Anita racetrack in California, but the web of his actions was far more intricate than anyone had initially imagined. The investigation into Seadlund's past, motives, and ultimate betrayal didn't just reveal a cold-blooded criminal, but a deeply troubled man whose ambition had spiraled out of control. Seadlund was arrested with startling ease, considering the elaborate nature of the crime he had orchestrated. Posing as a regular gambler, he had no idea that agents from the FBI were watching him closely, having already traced the ransom money to the racetrack. It was there, in a twist of fate, that the very thing Seadlund thought would secure his escape, money, became the instrument of his downfall. The agents had tracked the serial numbers of the ransom bills, leading them to his door. At first, Seadlund was confident that his carefully executed crime could not be unraveled. But the truth, as it often does, came crashing down on him. The FBI had quickly pieced together the puzzle of Seadlund's life, and the more they discovered, the clearer it became that his crimes weren't the impulsive actions of a desperate man, but rather a calculated series of steps leading to a devastating conclusion. From his early life in Wisconsin to his criminal beginnings in the mid-1930s, everything about Seadlund pointed to a man consumed by greed and a twisted sense of invincibility. He had been involved in several heists prior to the kidnapping, and the murder of Charles Ross was simply the culmination of his growing arrogance. Seadlund's confident demeanor and audacious belief that he could pull off the perfect crime became his undoing. As Seadlund sat in custody awaiting trial, the FBI began to uncover more chilling details. His accomplice, James Atwood Gray, had been an innocent victim of Seadlund's betrayal. Gray, only 20 years old, had been coerced into helping Seadlund with the kidnapping. But when Gray became a potential liability by suggesting that they split the ransom money, Seadlund made a ruthless decision to silence him. The FBI learned that Seadlund had killed Gray in a fit of rage, claiming self-defense in his confession. The betrayal was staggering, as Seadlund had not only murdered his accomplice, but also sealed his own fate by committing an act that ensured no one else could ever testify against him. The most haunting part of Seadlund's confession came when he led agents to the sites where he had disposed of the bodies. In Spooner, Wisconsin, Seadlund had buried both Ross and Gray in a pit, and it was there that the true horror of the crime was revealed. The remains were discovered, confirming the grisly details of the crime. Ross had been murdered after the ransom was paid, and his body had been left to rot, discarded like nothing more than a lifeless object. Gray's body lay beside him, a testament to Seadlund's ruthless desire for control and money. In the end, the FBI's meticulous investigation, led by agents who were unyielding in their pursuit of justice, had exposed the entire plot for what it was: a cold-blooded series of betrayals, manipulation, and murder. As Seadlund faced trial, the public's hunger for justice reached a fever pitch. The case had captivated the nation from the moment the kidnapping occurred. The idea that someone as vulnerable as Ross could be so violently taken from his car and then subjected to such a brutal end struck at the heart of American fears. In the midst of the Great Depression, the kidnapping of a wealthy businessman, followed by the shocking murders, struck a chord in the American public's psyche. The media played a central role in keeping the case in the spotlight, with newspapers running daily updates on Seadlund's movements, the details of the investigation, and the growing hope that justice would soon be served. But it wasn't just the public's fascination with crime that drove the media frenzy. The case was a turning point for the FBI, which had taken charge of the investigation with a sense of resolve and determination. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, had made it clear from the beginning that the agency would not rest until justice was served. This case, with its high stakes and intricate details, proved the FBI's capacity to deal with complex crimes, setting a precedent for future investigations. The use of technology, such as tracking serial numbers on ransom bills and employing radio coordination to catch criminals across state lines, made the Ross kidnapping one of the first modern criminal cases in the United States. Seadlund's capture and conviction marked a victory not just for the victims and their families, but also for the FBI's growing reputation as a national law enforcement powerhouse. Seadlund's trial began in early 1938, and the charges against him were severe. He was convicted of the kidnapping and murder of Charles Sherman Ross, and he was sentenced to death. On July 14, 1938, Seadlund was executed by electric chair at the Cook County Jail in Chicago. His execution marked the end of a case that had dominated the media for almost a year and sent a strong message to those who thought they could evade justice. The chilling reality of his crime and the cold manner in which he executed his plan left a permanent scar on the nation's collective consciousness. The case was closed, but its legacy would linger for years to come. The impact of the Ross kidnapping on American society, law enforcement, and the public was immense. It not only solidified the FBI's role as a major player in criminal investigations, but also sparked an ongoing conversation about the rise of violent crime during the Depression era. The case became a cautionary tale about the lengths to which people would go for money and the consequences of betraying those closest to them. The media circus that surrounded Seadlund's trial and the fascination with his supposed perfect crime became part of the mythos of 1930s gangster-era America. In a time when crime and violence were rampant, the case embodied the harsh realities of a society struggling with economic hardship and moral decay. It was a reminder that even the wealthiest and most well-protected were not immune to the dangers of the times. As the decades passed, the story of Charles Sherman Ross and his tragic kidnapping became one of many tales from the 1930s that defined an era. But the questions lingered. Could Seadlund have pulled off the perfect crime? Was his greed the only factor that led to the horrific deaths of two men? What if Gray hadn't been killed? Would Ross still have been alive to tell the tale?